December 15th, 1944, Western France. Klaus Richter commanded Germany's deadliest tank, the Panther. 28 Allied tanks destroyed. A technological masterpiece with armor so thick that American shells bounced off like pebbles. His crew called enemy Shermans Tommy cookers because they burst into flames so easily. That morning, intelligence reported just 5 Sherman tanks defending a French village. Easy prey. Richter's Panthers could destroy them at 2,000 meters before the Americans could even return fire. But something went catastrophically wrong. Within 30 minutes, all 3 German Panthers lay burning in that field. The 5 Inferior Shermans had systematically hunted and destroyed Germany's most advanced tanks using tactics that should have been impossible. Richter, pulled from his burning Panther, couldn't understand what he'd witnessed. These weren't the racially inferior, poorly trained Americans that Nazi propaganda had promised. These were something else entirely. Captured and sent to an American POW camp, Richter discovered a truth so shocking it would shatter everything he believed about German superiority, American weakness, and why his invincible war machine was actually losing. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. December 15th, 1944. The morning mist hung over the French countryside like a gray blanket. Hauptmann Klaus Richter stood in the commander's cupola of his Panther tank, breathing in the cold air. 28 enemy tanks lay destroyed by his gun. 28 victories that made him one of Germany's most feared tank commanders. The war was not going well for Germany. Everyone knew this, though few dared say it out loud. The Americans had landed in France 6 months ago. German cities burned under endless bomber raids. Fuel grew scarce. Good men died faster than they could be replaced. But Germany still possessed the finest tanks in the world. The Panther weighed 45 tons of steel and fury. Its long 75mm gun could punch through any Allied tank at 2,000 meters. The Americans knew this. Their Sherman tanks caught fire so easily that German crews called them Tommy cookers. Richter's crew had fought together for 2 years. They survived the hell of the Eastern Front, where Soviet tanks came in endless waves. Otto, his driver, could make the Panther dance like a ballerina despite its massive weight. Franz, the gunner, could thread a needle at 1,500 meters. Young Werner loaded shells with the speed of a machine. Heinrich, the radio operator, spoke perfect English and often listened to American radio chatter. They were professionals. They had earned the right to feel confident. The French village of Saint-Michel sat in a valley between 2 low hills. German intelligence reported 5 American Sherman tanks defending the town. Just 5 tanks against 3 German Panthers. Richter almost felt sorry for the Americans. Their Shermans carried only a short 75mm gun. Their armor was thin as paper compared to the Panther's thick steel hide. The coming battle would be a slaughter. But something felt wrong. Richter could not name it, but the feeling sat in his stomach like a cold stone. The village was too quiet. No smoke from chimneys, no movement in the streets. Even the birds seemed to have fled. Heinrich crackled over the radio. American voices on the frequency, Herr Hauptmann. They sound calm, too calm. This was the first strange thing. Soldiers about to die usually sounded afraid. These Americans chattered like they were discussing the weather. Richter pushed the feeling aside. Fear made men imagine things that were not there. The 3 Panthers moved into position on the ridge overlooking Saint-Michel. Richter's tank took the center. Lieutenant Kruger's Panther moved to the left. Sergeant Hoffman's machine swung right. A perfect formation to catch the Americans in crossfire. Through his periscope, Richter spotted the enemy tanks. 5 Shermans positioned themselves around the village square. They sat motionless, like sleeping cats. Range 1,500 meters, Franz reported. Easy shot, Herr Hauptmann. Richter smiled. At this distance, his Panther could destroy the Shermans before they could fight back. The American 75mm gun could barely scratch his armor at such range. This would be over quickly. Fire at will, Richter commanded. Franz's first shot struck a Sherman in the turret. The tank shuddered but did not explode. This was the second strange thing. American tanks usually burst into flames immediately. This one kept moving. Worse, all 5 Shermans suddenly came alive like angry hornets. Instead of retreating or taking cover, they charged forward at full speed. "They're attacking," Heinrich shouted, "all 5 tanks moving toward our position." This made no sense. American tank crews were taught to avoid direct confrontation with Panthers. They knew they would lose. Yet these 5 Shermans raced across the open ground with no fear at all. Black smoke poured from their engines as they pushed their machines to maximum speed. Richter watched through his periscope as the enemy tanks split into 2 groups. 3 Shermans swung left toward Kruger's position. 2 tanks moved right toward Hoffmann. They were not charging blindly. This was a coordinated attack plan. "Heinrich, call for artillery support," Richter ordered. "No answer, Herr Hauptmann. The radio is dead." Dead radios were the third strange thing. German communications equipment rarely failed. Richter felt the cold stone in his stomach grow larger. Franz fired again. His shell struck another Sherman, but the American tank kept moving. The enemy gunner returned fire. His shot fell short, but not by much. At this range, American guns should not even reach the Panthers. Yet somehow they were getting close. The battle became chaotic. Smoke and dust filled the air. The roar of engines and crack of tank guns echoed across the valley. Richter watched in growing horror as the 5 American tanks moved with deadly purpose. They did not fight like amateurs. Every movement was planned. Every shot was calculated. Lieutenant Kruger's voice screamed over the radio. "They got behind me! How did they get behind me?" A massive explosion followed. Orange flames reached toward the sky where Kruger's Panther used to be. This was impossible. The Panther was invincible. Its thick armor could stop any Allied shell. Yet Kruger's tank burned like a torch. The Americans must have found a weak spot, a lucky shot perhaps. But then Hoffmann's radio crackled with panic. "My engine is hit! I cannot move!" Another explosion shook the ground. Sergeant Hoffmann's Panther joined the funeral pyre. 2 Panthers destroyed in minutes. Richter found himself alone against 5 enemy tanks. His hands shook as he gripped the commander's periscope. The Americans moved like wolves circling wounded prey. They did not charge him. Instead, they spread out and began flanking maneuvers. "Otto, get us out of here!" Richter shouted. The driver tried to start the engine. Nothing happened. He tried again. The Panther's motor turned over but wouldn't catch. This was the 4th strange thing. Panther engines were reliable. They didn't fail at critical moments. "Otto, the final drive, Herr Hauptmann. Something is wrong with the final drive." Final drive problems plagued the Panther tank. German engineers built a magnificent gun and armor, but could not solve the mechanical troubles. The tank was too heavy for its transmission. Under stress, parts broke. At the worst possible moment, Richter's Panther had become a 45-ton sitting duck. The first American shell struck the Panther's side armor. The impact rang like a church bell. Richter felt the shock through his boots. The armor held, but barely. Cracks appeared in the steel plates. The second shell hit in almost the same spot. This time, the armor gave way. Fire erupted inside the tank. Franz screamed as flames engulfed his position. Heinrich tried to escape through the bottom hatch but could not move fast enough. Young Werner collapsed without a sound. Otto shouted for everyone to bail out. Richter pulled himself through the commander's hatch as his Panther became an inferno. He rolled off the tank and hit the ground hard. His uniform was smoking. His face felt sunburned from the heat. Behind him, 3 German Panthers burned like signal fires announcing defeat. American voices surrounded him. Soldiers in olive-drab uniforms pointed rifles at his chest. They looked professional and well-equipped. Their faces were calm, not excited by victory. They had done this before. A young American lieutenant approached. He spoke perfect German. "You are prisoners of war. Do not resist and you will not be harmed." Richter looked back at the burning tanks. His crew, his friends, were dead. The finest tanks Germany could build lay twisted and smoking. 5 American Sherman tanks sat undamaged around the village. Their crews climbed out and began checking their machines for damage. They worked with quiet efficiency. "How?" Richter whispered in English. "How did you do this?" The American lieutenant smiled. "Training, Hauptmann, lots and lots of training." As American medics treated his burns, Richter stared at the Sherman tanks. They looked so ordinary, so plain and simple compared to the elegant Panther. Yet they had destroyed his unit with surgical precision. Everything he believed about German superiority and American weakness lay burning in those 3 funeral pyres. The cold stone in his stomach had become a boulder. Something was terribly wrong with everything he had been told about this war. The American truck bounced along the French road. Richter sat with his hands tied behind his back. 2 guards watched him carefully. His burns still hurt from the tank fire. The memory of his burning Panther would not leave his mind. How had 5 simple Sherman tanks destroyed 3 superior Panthers so easily? The American lieutenant smiled. "Training, Hauptmann, lots and lots of training." As American medics treated his burns, Richter stared at the Sherman tanks. They looked so ordinary, so plain and simple compared to the elegant Panther. Yet they had destroyed his unit with surgical precision. Everything he believed about German superiority and American weakness lay burning in those 3 funeral pyres. The cold stone in his stomach had become a boulder. Something was terribly wrong with everything he had been told about this war. The American truck bounced along the French road. Richter sat with his hands tied behind his back. 2 guards watched him carefully. His burns still hurt from the tank fire. The memory of his burning Panther would not leave his mind. How had 5 simple Sherman tanks destroyed 3 superior Panthers so easily? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The truck stopped at a collection point where other German prisoners waited. Richter recognized some faces from other tank units. These men looked defeated. Their eyes stared at nothing. One soldier had his arm in a sling. Another limped on an injured leg. They all wore the same expression of confusion and shock. An American sergeant spoke in broken German. "Food comes soon. Water is there." He pointed to metal containers filled with clean water. Richter expected prison food to be thin soup and stale bread. German prisoners in Russia often starved to death. But when the American cooks arrived, they carried steaming pots that smelled like real meat. The food shocked Richter more than the tank battle. Each prisoner received a metal tray filled with beef stew, mashed potatoes, green beans, and white bread with butter. The portions were larger than what German soldiers ate in their own barracks. Richter had not seen butter in 2 years. The bread was soft and fresh. The meat was tender and plentiful. A young German corporal sat beside him. "They must be trying to trick us," the boy whispered. "Good food makes prisoners talk." But the American guards were not asking questions. They simply made sure everyone had enough to eat. When prisoners finished their meals, the cooks offered second helpings. One guard even shared his chocolate bar with a wounded German who could not use his injured arm to eat. This was not how prisoners of war were supposed to be treated. German propaganda taught that Americans were cruel and heartless. They would torture captured soldiers and starve them to death. Yet here was kindness where cruelty was expected. The next morning brought another surprise. American trucks arrived to take prisoners to a permanent camp. But first, medics examined every injured soldier. They cleaned and bandaged wounds, they gave medicine for pain. A doctor spent 20 minutes treating Richter's burns with special cream and clean bandages. In German hospitals, soldiers waited hours for such care. The truck convoy moved through the French countryside. Richter watched through a small window as endless streams of American vehicles passed in the opposite direction. Trucks loaded with supplies, tank transporters carrying new Sherman tanks to the front, fuel trucks that seemed to stretch forever, mobile workshops, field kitchens, hospital units. The Americans had more of everything than Richter could count. One sight made his stomach feel cold again. A graveyard of German tanks sat beside the road. Panthers, Tigers, and Mark IV tanks lay twisted and burned. American recovery vehicles worked to clear the wreckage. German prisoners helped load the scrap metal onto trucks. The Americans were recycling destroyed German tanks to build more of their own equipment. But the most shocking sight was a column of new American tanks heading to the front. Not just 5 or 10 tanks, but hundreds. Sherman after Sherman rolled past in an endless line. Their crews waved at the prisoners with casual confidence. These men showed no fear of facing German armor. They acted like victory was certain. At the permanent prisoner camp in England, Richter discovered that American abundance was not limited to military supplies. The camp itself was better than many German barracks he had seen. Each building had electric lights and indoor toilets. Hot water flowed from pipes. The beds had real mattresses and clean sheets. German soldiers at home often slept on straw. The camp kitchen amazed him most of all. American cooks prepared 3 full meals every day. Breakfast included eggs, bacon, toast, and coffee. Real coffee, not the bitter substitute Germans drank. Lunch brought hot soup, sandwiches with thick meat, and fresh fruit. Dinner featured roast beef, potatoes, vegetables, and sometimes even ice cream for dessert. Ice cream? Richter had not tasted ice cream since before the war. In Germany, such luxuries disappeared years ago. Yet here, in a prisoner camp, American guards served ice cream to enemy soldiers. The cold sweetness melted on his tongue like a forgotten dream. A German major named Weber sat at Richter's table during dinner. Weber had been captured near Paris 2 months earlier. His unit fought against American armored divisions. "They have ice cream trucks," Weber said quietly. "Actual trucks that make ice cream and drive it to soldiers in the field. While our men eat horse meat and black bread, American soldiers get ice cream delivered to the front lines." Richter could not believe this. Ice cream trucks in combat zones? "I saw it with my own eyes," Weber continued. "A Coca-Cola truck, too. It brought cold drinks to American tank crews during battle. They were drinking Coca-Cola while shooting at us." This seemed impossible. Germany rationed everything. Coffee, sugar, meat, gasoline, rubber, even soap was hard to find. But Americans brought luxury items to battlefields. They had so much of everything that they could waste resources on comfort items for soldiers. Other prisoners shared similar stories. Hans, a pilot, described American airfields with thousands of planes parked in neat rows. "More planes than we built in the entire war," he said. just sitting there waiting to be used. Kurt from an infantry division talked about American medical care. Their field hospitals were like palaces. Clean beds, electric lights, hot food for wounded soldiers. German hospitals looked like caves compared to American field hospitals. The stories continued day after day. American factories that built tanks faster than Germany could destroy them. Supply ships that brought endless materials from America. Training camps where new soldiers learned to fight with the best equipment in the world. Everything pointed to the same impossible truth. America was not struggling to fight this war. America was barely trying. The industrial power that fed prisoners ice cream and delivered Coca-Cola to battlefields was just a small part of what the country could do. Germany was fighting with everything it had. America was fighting with one hand behind its back. This realization hit Richter like a tank shell. All the propaganda about American weakness was lies. The stories about lazy American workers and inferior American industry were false. The claims that Americans could not fight were completely wrong. The enemy was not weaker than Germany, the enemy was stronger than German had ever imagined. Richter began to understand why 5 Sherman tanks had destroyed his 3 Panthers. The Americans did not need superior tanks, they were superior to everything else. Better training, better supplies, better communications, better tactics. Most importantly, they had so many tanks that losing a few did not matter.
British strategy depended on building perfect weapons that could not be replaced when destroyed. The American strategy was to build good weapons that could be replaced immediately when lost. The Americans could afford to lose 5 Sherman tanks to kill 1 Panther because 6 new Shermans would arrive the next day. During mail calls, prisoners received letters from home. The news from Germany grew worse each week. Cities bombed to rubble. Food shortages are getting desperate. Young boys and old men being drafted to replace dead soldiers. The homeland was dying while the enemy grew stronger. But the American guards received letters too. Richter sometimes glimpsed the contents when guards read their mail nearby. American families wrote about new jobs in factories, about buying new cars and homes, about children growing healthy and strong. America was not suffering from this war. America was growing richer and more powerful. The contrast became clear in a way that hurt to think about. Germany was bleeding itself to death fighting a war it could never win. America was getting stronger by fighting a war it could never lose. The outcome was certain. It had always been certain. German leaders either knew this and lied to their people, or they were blind to reality. As Christmas approached, the American camp prepared a special meal for prisoners. Turkey, ham, potatoes, vegetables, pie, and yes, ice cream. The guards sang Christmas carols and shared presents with the German prisoners. Enemy soldiers treating captured enemies like guests at a holiday dinner. Richter ate his Christmas meal in silence. The food tasted wonderful, but his thoughts were bitter. Everything he had believed was wrong. Everything he had been told was lies. Everything he had fought for was hopeless. The war was over. Germany just didn't know it yet. What other lies had he believed? What other truths had been hidden from him? If American strength was real, what else about America might be different from what German propaganda claimed? The moment that broke Klaus Richter happened on a cold January morning in 1945. Snow covered the prisoner camp in England. Richter sat in the camp library reading American newspapers that guards allowed prisoners to see. The news from Germany was terrible. Soviet armies pushed toward Berlin. American bombers turned German cities into ash. The war was clearly lost, but German leaders kept fighting. An American captain named Johnson entered the library. He spoke fluent German and often talked with prisoners about the war. Johnson was different from other guards. He asked real questions and listened to real answers. He treated German prisoners like human beings instead of dangerous animals. "Richter," Johnson said, sitting down across from him, "I want to show you something." Johnson opened a folder filled with photographs. The first picture showed a German concentration camp that American soldiers had liberated. Richter saw piles of bodies stacked like firewood. Living skeletons stared at the camera with dead eyes. American soldiers stood nearby, looking sick and angry. "Did you know about this?" Johnson asked quietly. Richter stared at the photograph. His hands began to shake. "This cannot be real. This must be propaganda." Johnson showed him more pictures. Camp after camp, thousands of bodies, gas chambers, ovens for burning people, medical experiments on children. The photographs were too detailed to be fake, too horrible to lie. "Your government did this," Johnson said. "While you were fighting for German honor, your leaders were murdering millions of innocent people." The words hit Richter like artillery shells. Everything inside his mind began to crumble. He had fought for this? He had killed Allied soldiers to protect this? His friends had died defending people who burned children alive? Richter ran outside into the snow. He fell to his knees and vomited until nothing came up but bitter bile. Other prisoners found him there an hour later, crying like a broken child. The photographs had destroyed the last pieces of his faith in Germany. But Johnson was not finished. The next day, he brought Richter to the camp commander's office. Colonel Martinez, a Mexican-American officer, sat behind his desk. Maps of Germany covered the walls. Radio reports crackled from a speaker in the corner. "Hauptmann Richter," Colonel Martinez said in perfect German, "Captain Johnson tells me you are beginning to understand the truth about this war." Richter could barely speak. "The camps, are they all real?" "Every one of them," Martinez replied. "We have liberated dozens already. There are more every day. Your countrymen built factories for murder." Martinez walked to a map showing American military positions. Red arrows pointed towards Berlin from all directions. Numbers beside each arrow showed the size of American forces. The numbers were enormous. Millions of soldiers, thousands of tanks, more planes than Richter could count. "Look at these numbers," Martinez said. "America has not even used its full strength yet. We could have ended this war in 1943 if we wanted to. But we chose to let the Soviet Union bleed itself white fighting you on the Eastern Front. We saved our strength for the final blow." This revelation stunned Richter more than the camp photographs. America had been holding back? The massive forces he had seen were not even America's best effort? The enemy had been playing with Germany like a cat playing with a wounded mouse? Martinez continued his lesson. "Your Panther tanks were magnificent machines, but we built 50 Sherman tanks for every Panther you produced. Your pilots were skilled and brave, but we trained 100 pilots for every one you lost. Your submarines sank our ships, but we built ships faster than you could sink them." The colonel opened another folder. This one contained production numbers from American factories. The statistics made Richter's head spin. In 1944 alone, America built 88,000 tanks. Germany built 25,000. America produced 300,000 aircraft. Germany made 40,000. American factories turned out bullets, shells, vehicles, and weapons at rates that seemed impossible. "How?" Richter whispered. "How can one country make so much?" "Because America was never really at war," Martinez explained.
While German women worked in ammunition factories, American women bought new dresses and went to movies. While German children ate turnip soup, American children drank milkshakes and ate hamburgers. We fought this war with our extra capacity. Germany fought with everything it had. The truth was crushing. Germany had sacrificed everything for this war. America had sacrificed almost nothing. American families got richer while German families starved. American cities grew larger while German cities burned. The two countries were not equal opponents. They never had been. That night, Richter couldn't sleep. He walked around the camp in the darkness, thinking about everything he had learned. The other prisoners avoided him. Word had spread that the American officers were showing him secret information. Some called him a traitor. Others said he was going crazy.
But Richter was not going crazy. He was becoming sane for the first time in years. All the propaganda lies were falling away like dead skin. The truth underneath was ugly but clear. Germany had started a war it could never win against an enemy it never understood. Captain Johnson found him sitting alone in the mess hall at 3 in the morning. Richter was writing in a small notebook that the Americans had given him. "What are you writing?" Johnson asked. "Letters to my family," Richter replied. "Letters I will never send." Johnson sat down beside him. "What do you want to tell them?" Richter read from his notebook. "Dear Father, everything you taught me about German superiority was a lie. The Americans are not weak or cowardly. They are stronger than we ever imagined. They have more of everything than we can count. They treat their enemies better than we treat our friends." He turned the page. "Dear Mother, the soldiers I killed were not subhuman monsters. They were men like me, fighting for their countries. They had families who loved them. They died because I believed lies about race and blood and soil." Another page. "Dear Maria, if I survive this war, I will come home a different man. The Klaus you married believed in things that were never true. The Klaus who returns will have learned that kindness matters more than strength, that building matters more than destroying it, that truth matters more than victory." Johnson listened without speaking. When Richter finished reading, the American captain asked a simple question. "Do you still believe Germany was right to start this war?" "No," Richter answered immediately. "We were wrong about everything. Wrong about America, wrong about ourselves, wrong about what makes a nation great." "What makes a nation great?" Johnson asked. Richter thought for a long moment. "Not the best tanks or the strongest army, not racial purity or Lebensraum or any of the other lies they taught us. A great nation takes care of its people. It builds schools and hospitals instead of concentration camps. It makes life better for everyone, not just the chosen few." Johnson smiled sadly. "Many Americans would agree with you, but many would not. We have our own problems with race and hatred. We are not as perfect as we pretend to be." This honesty surprised Richter. German propaganda never admitted weakness or failure. But Americans could criticize themselves and still be strong. They could acknowledge problems and still be confident. This was another lesson about real strength versus fake strength. The weeks that followed brought more revelations. Richter learned that America had black soldiers fighting in the war, though they were often treated badly by their own army. He discovered that Japanese Americans were locked in camps inside America, even though most were loyal citizens. He found out that many Americans opposed the war and protested against it freely. These contradictions confused him at first. How could America be strong if it allowed dissent? How could it win wars while fighting internal battles about race and justice? But slowly, Richter began to understand. America's strength came from its ability to argue with itself and still move forward. Germany's weakness came from demanding total agreement and crushing all opposition. In his notebook, Richter wrote his final entry. "I commanded the most advanced tank in the world. I killed 28 enemy tanks. I believed I was fighting for civilization against barbarism. But the barbarians were us. We were the ones burning books and people. We were the ones starting wars and crushing freedom. The Americans were not perfect, but they were building something better than what we were destroying." He closed the notebook and looked out the window at the English countryside. Spring was coming. Green shoots pushed through the last patches of snow. Somewhere beyond the horizon, Germany was dying in fire and blood. But maybe something new could grow from the ashes, something honest, something decent, something worth believing in. The war would end soon. Richter would go home eventually. But the man who returned to Germany would carry these truths with him forever. He had learned the difference between propaganda and reality, between strength and brutality, between patriotism and blindness. These lessons had cost him everything he once believed, but they had given him something more valuable than belief. They had given him knowledge. The train carrying Klaus Richter home to Germany wheezed and coughed like a dying animal. It was August 1947, 2 years after the war ended. The locomotive burned wood instead of coal because coal was too expensive. The passenger cars had broken windows covered with cardboard. Richter pressed his face against the dirty glass and watched his homeland pass by like a nightmare. Everything was destroyed. Cities looked like broken teeth in a giant's mouth. Twisted metal and piles of rubble stretched as far as he could see. Children in rags searched through garbage for scraps of food. Old women pulled wooden carts loaded with their few remaining possessions. This was what remained of the 1,000-year Reich that was supposed to last forever. The train stopped at a bombed station in what used to be Munich. Richter stepped onto the platform carrying a small canvas bag. Everything he owned in the world fit inside that bag. A change of clothes, his notebook from the prison camp, a letter from Captain Johnson wishing him luck, and a small American chocolate bar that he was saving for his son. The contrast with England hit him like a physical blow. In the prisoner camp, he had grown used to cleaning buildings, electric lights, and plenty of food. Now he stood in a railway station with no roof, no windows, and no heat. The smell of unwashed bodies and human waste filled the air. This was home, but it felt like hell. Richter walked through the ruins of Munich toward his family's apartment. The building was still standing, but barely. Chunks of concrete had fallen from the walls. The front door hung crooked on broken hinges. He climbed 4 flights of stairs in darkness because there was no electricity. His wife Maria opened the door before he could knock. She had been watching from the window. 3 years had aged her 10 years. Her once blonde hair was now gray and thin. Her face was hollow from hunger, but her eyes still held the same love he remembered. "Klaus," she whispered, falling into her arms. They held each other for a long time without speaking. Words seemed too small for everything they had endured. Behind Maria, Richter saw his son Peter standing in the doorway. The boy was 8 years old now, but he looked younger because of poor food. He stared at his father with suspicious eyes. The apartment was freezing cold. There was no fuel for heating. The windows were covered with blankets because the glass had been blown out during bombing raids. Maria served dinner on chipped plates, thin soup made from potato peels, bread that was more sawdust than wheat, a tiny piece of meat that might have been horse or dog.
"This is a feast," Maria said proudly. "I saved extra food for your homecoming." Richter ate slowly, remembering the meals he had enjoyed in the American prison camp. Turkey and ham at Christmas, ice cream on summer evenings, fresh bread every morning. He felt guilty for every good meal he had eaten while his family starved. But he also felt angry at the leaders who had brought this suffering to Germany. After dinner, Peter sat beside him on the old sofa. The boy had been only 5 when Richter left for war. Now he was a stranger who called him Sir instead of Papa. "Tell me about the war," Peter said. "Tell me how you killed the enemy." Richter looked into his son's eyes and saw the same hatred he had once carried. Someone had filled this child's head with the same poison that had destroyed Germany. But Richter had brought an antidote home from England. "The war was wrong," Richter replied. "We started it, and we deserved to lose it."
Peter's face turned red with anger. "That's not true! Germany was great! The Americans cheated! They won because they had more soldiers, not because they were better." These words came from the boy's grandfather, Richter realized. His father still believed the old lies, still thought Germany had been betrayed rather than defeated, still blamed others for Germany's failures. "Listen to me carefully," Richter said, pulling out his notebook. "I want to tell you what I learned in the war, what I learned about real strength and fake strength." He opened the notebook and began to read. Stories about American abundance and German scarcity, about ice cream trucks and Coca-Cola deliveries to the front lines, about concentration camps and murder factories, about lies and propaganda and the difference between patriotism and blindness. Peter listened with growing confusion. This was not the story he expected to hear. This was not the glorious tale of German heroes fighting against impossible odds. This was something much more complicated and painful. "But grandfather says we were the master race," Peter protested. "He says Americans are weak and stupid." "Your grandfather is wrong," Richter replied. "I believed the same things once. Those beliefs got my friends killed and my country destroyed. I will not let those beliefs poison your mind." Maria sat quietly during this conversation. She had her own stories from the war years. Stories about standing in bread lines for hours only to find the bakery empty. About hiding in bomb shelters while American planes turned the city into rubble. About friends and neighbors who simply disappeared one day and never came back. "The Americans could have starved us to death after the war," she said to Peter. "Instead, they send food aid. They help us rebuild. They treat us better than we treated anyone during the war." This was true. American aid programs were keeping Germany alive. Without American brain shipments, millions of Germans would have starved. Without American medicine, disease would have killed thousands more. The same country that Germany had tried to destroy was now saving German lives. Over the following weeks, Richter learned more about what had happened to his homeland. He met other veterans who told different versions of the war. Some blamed treacherous politicians for Germany's defeat. Others blamed international conspiracies. A few blamed the weather, or bad luck, or superior enemy numbers. But none of them blamed the real cause of defeat. None of them admitted that Germany had started an evil war for evil reasons. None of them understood that America's victory came from superior organization, training, and industrial power. They all preferred comfortable lies to uncomfortable truths. Richter found work clearing rubble from bombed buildings. The pay was small, but it was honest work. While he shoveled broken concrete, he thought about the lessons he had learned in captivity. America had not won the war through luck or treachery. America had won through better systems, better training, and better values. The most important lesson was about building versus destroying. Germany had spent its energy conquering and killing. America had spent its energy producing and creating.
When the war ended, America was stronger than before. Germany was weaker than it had been in a century. One evening, Richter sat with Peter looking at pictures in an American magazine that someone had smuggled into Germany. The pictures showed American cities that had grown larger during the war. American factories that produced more goods than ever before. American families that owned cars and houses and television sets. How did they do it? Peter asked. How did they get so rich while fighting a war? Because they built a system that made them stronger, not weaker, Richter explained. While we sent our young men to die in foreign countries, Americans sent their young men to work in factories. While we burned books, Americans built schools. While we made enemies, Americans made allies. Peter was beginning to understand. His father was teaching him to think differently about strength and weakness, about winning and losing, about what made countries great. "Will Germany ever be strong again?" the boy asked. "Yes," Richter said, "but only if we learn from our mistakes, only if we build instead of destroy, only if we tell the truth instead of believing lies." Richter pulled out the American chocolate bar he had saved. He broke it into 3 pieces and shared it with his wife and son. The sweet taste reminded him of the prison camp where he had learned so much about himself and his country. "This chocolate came from America," he told Peter. "The same country we called our enemy. The same people we tried to destroy. They could hate us forever for what we did. Instead, they choose to help us rebuild." Over the following weeks, Richter started a new tradition. Every evening after dinner, he would read to Peter from books about other countries and other ways of life. Books about democracy and freedom and human rights. Books that had been banned during the Nazi years. "I want you to understand the world as it really is," he told his son. "Not as propaganda says it should be. I want you to judge people by their actions, not their race or religion. I want you to build things instead of tearing them down." Years passed. Peter grew into a young man who thought for himself. He learned English and French and eventually moved to America for university. He became an engineer who designed bridges and buildings. He married an American woman and raised children who spoke both German and English. When Peter's own son asked about the war, Peter repeated the lessons his father had taught him. About the danger of believing propaganda, about the difference between real strength and fake strength, about the importance of building rather than destroying. "Your grandfather learned these lessons the hard way," Peter told his son. "He believed lies until reality forced him to see the truth. He wanted to make sure I never made the same mistakes." In 1975, Klaus Richter died peacefully in his sleep. At his funeral, Peter read from his father's notebook, the same notebook that had recorded the transformation of a Nazi tank commander into a man who understood the value of truth. "My father once told me that wars are not won by the best tanks," Peter said to the gathered mourners. "They are won by the best systems, the best training, the best values." He learned this lesson in an American prison camp where enemies treated him better than his own government ever had. The final entry in Richter's notebook contained his most important lesson. "I spent my youth believing that strength came from hating others. I spent my middle age learning that strength comes from understanding others. I spent my old age teaching my son that the strongest nations are those that lift up their enemies instead of crushing them." This was Klaus Richter's legacy, not the 28 tanks he had destroyed, but the one mind he had rebuilt. Not the war he had fought, but the peace he had chosen. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.